Good. I will give you a bit more detailed insight in the models, which are applied here for the drought monitoring and about the algorithms behind and how we are using and testing it currently. So the first system is about drought monitoring. This was a project from 2013 till 2016 where we tried to establish a drought monitoring system for Austria. We needed to build up a database because we planned in this project to have not a general drought monitoring system, but a crop-specific drought monitoring system. So we are more or less predicting drought conditions for specific main crops in Austria. So for that we need, of course, data from the different crops, yield data, etc. We need soil water contents, etc. and so on. So first aim was to develop the algorithms, the calculation of the crop soil water balance and so on. Then to implement these algorithms in a GIS, and finally to test the system for operational application. Good, let's come first to the most important thing, which is the calculation of the soil water balance. It is a simplified soil water balance, of course, because you have to consider the special available data sets which are available for calculating soil water balance, and these are limited. Yeah? So we have to apply, or can apply, only a simple model, a simple soil water balance model, which is based on the, let's say, more or less available Austrian soil map, where we get specific information on the soil conditions, especially for the soil water holding capacity, the available crop water availability of crops. And here we divided different soil layers from 0 to 20, 20 to 40 centimeters, and for arable crops 0 to 40, and a sublayer from 40 centimeters to 1 meter soil depths. So the resolution of the soil layers is quite rough, so it's not, let's say, in 5 centimeter steps, but large, big soil layers. And this is already a simplification, of course. Yeah? So the base of some uncertainties also, which can be produced in the model. Good, then we consider also what we have to consider for soil water balance calculation is the kind of root water extraction over the soil layers. So it's a rough assumption what we apply, that we say based on measurements, that 60% of the soil water will be depleted from the top soil layer and 40% from the lower soil layer once the full root system is developed for agriculture crops. This is also a rough assumption, which is not always fitting the reality, of course. So another point is when we calculate the soil water balance over several years, it's an ongoing calculation. There is a danger that when you run a model several years over a winter period and so on, where there's no crop on the field and so on, that it could be biased. The soil water balance calculation could be biased when there is not a regular reset by, let's say, strong rains, where the full soil water capacity is filled up by 100%. This is always a reset, very important reset, what makes your calculations in the next period more accurate. If you have for a long time soil water contents beyond this level, then the danger is increasing that you can get more and more bias. So that is why we apply the rule that we assume that during winter, starting from January, we always assume 100% of field capacity, soil water is filled up. which is in most years in Austria it is the case, but in some smaller regions not every year. Yeah? This is an assumption. But we can of course also have the option that we run it continuously, because during 1 year most of the time we have such events that soil water is filled up to 100%. Good, and what we also have to do is, because we are calculating it crop specific, we need to consider the phenology of the agriculture crops, because depending on the biomass on the field is developing also the actual evapotranspiration and water use from the soil. So we also need to have a good idea at which stage the crop is and how much biomass is there actually on the field to calculate the soil water uptake from the soil and by the plants. Good, and more or less this is a scheme of the soil water balance calculation, and you can see it's based on the FAO approach, which is published by Allen et al. 1998. It's a worldwide used approach in many irrigation models and so on, so it's very well tested and so on. Where we calculate here based on the crop phenology, yeah, which is calculated based on temperature sums. We calculate the crop coefficient, which is determining the reduction of the potential evapotranspiration to actual evapotranspiration. And so we got finally the root water uptake, and then finally the soil water content, and the water stress coefficient is calculated. And so we have daily weather input parameters, and we have calculated the interception, the net precipitation, finally what is going into the soil, what is percolated into the groundwater, and so on. So we have the soil water balance, soil water content, and then we calculate from the soil water status, we calculate the drought heat stress index, also the drought stress index. And finally we have then algorithms which are simulating the potential crop yield impact and others, several drought indicators. Good. Yeah, that's more or less a general concept. The soil water balance model, yeah, is just a simple cascade model where the water infiltration is considered only in a vertical way from top to down. It is not included calculation of capillary rise from groundwater, and also not any horizontal soil water flows from a hilly region, for example, is always neglected. So when we calculate the soil water content in that way, it is calculated that we calculate the relative soil saturation in percent, means how much percent of the crop available soil water is still in this 1 meter soil layer in case of agriculture crops. And the second parameter is the drought intensity, which is nothing else than the actual soil water content is compared to the past 30-year average for exactly this time, yeah, plus minus 10 days. So it's a relative deviation to the so-called normal, which is not changing all the time, of course. Yeah. So, good, and then we have so-called stress indicators. So we calculate stress indicators defined by critical temperatures or critical soil water depletion, and using these indicators we related or calibrated these indicators in context to reported yield statistics from different main crops, and then we got, let's say, a simple regression model, linear regression on the yield impact by drought and heat. I will show you later more details on that. Well, we tested, of course, the The soil water calculations of the model are on different sites in Austria. You see the points here where we have lysimeters or permanent soil water measurements. You see some example here, comparison between simulated and measured soil water contents. You see there are some deviations sometimes, but in general we follow the main course quite well. So the crop-specific responses to drought and heat. Drought impacts and heat impacts are complex. Yeah, it's not only one simple physiological impact. This is a combination of different impacts. You know, the first drought impact is more or less that stomata are closing, so that it means photosynthesis rates are decreasing and you have less biomass partitioning. But also drought has an impact on the distribution of assimilates, so it can change the yield formation process. The corn filling period can be influenced, for example, negatively. So there are several processes working together for their impacts on crops, and of course different crops react differently also to the different stress levels. And heat is the other thing. Why we included heat from the beginning? Because drought stress appears very often during summer together with heat stress. And when stomata are closing, transpirative cooling is going down, and you have at the same time becoming heat stress in combination with drought stress. And in fact, many studies showed that for cereals or winter wheat, for example, we can expect that heat will influence the yields in the future more than even drought in Europe. So heat is a really critical parameter which needs to be considered as well. And heat also has different direct impacts. Of course, heat and temperatures influence the phenology of speeding up the development of crops. It's influencing corn filling period. It has influence on fertility during the flowering period, and so on. So it's a complex thing. Also together with drought, it's very complex. So it's very difficult. We see that also when we compare different crop simulation models, process-oriented crop simulation models. We see that there are really still weaknesses in these models to addressing accurately drought and heat impacts in their real response to physiological processes. Good, so how we calibrated all these algorithms. First of all, we needed to develop the phenology model for the different crops. So what we did, we just used calibrated crop models, crop yield models for Austrian conditions, and simulated that over many years, and then we got the temperature response to the development rates. So that way we found out, let's say, certain temperature sum of the calibrated main cultivar, for example, in Austria, to reach some specific stages like flowering and harvest. And finally, the impact on the yield, we did like that we just applied a linear regression correlation of yield impact, drought and heat impacts, which we get from the weather data, on the mean reported crop yields over Austria. So you can see here, these are the settings of the phenology model for different main crops: winter wheat, maize, spring barley, and sugar beet. Where calibrate different temperature sums are used, and then finally we got this KC model, where different stages are then depending on the temperature sum. This is the start of the main growing phase. Here is a fully developed canopy. Here is start of the ripening phase, and so on. So the KC factor ranges from 1 to 0, or a little bit more, 1.2. This is the factor which is applied when you calculate the actual level transpiration. The potential level transpiration, you multiply with this factor and you get the actual transpiration for a well-watered crop. Yeah? And then additionally, a drought stress factor is also then applied to address for soil water depletion and drought stress in the soil. So you reduce even the actual transpiration then more to get the real value. So, and good. So what we did is to distinguish between two main risks. So crop risk measures means just to calculate general indicators which showing some risk for plants. Yeah? So the heat stress factor you can calculate, a drought stress factor you can calculate depending on the soil water depletion. Normally it is calculated like that when the soil water is depleted more than 30%, then stress starts at the crop. And you can apply combined heat and crop stress factors, what we did, and finally calibrated this to the crop yield responses. And then you get, when you calibrate this with crop yield response, you get the crop vulnerability measure. Okay, you can then run it over for a certain point over the time, several years, and you see the different indicators. We are showing these peaks are the drought stress during the growing season. It's a dry year, it's a wet year, 2014 for example. These are examples of the yield responses of the Austrian yield statistics for the different crops here, spring barley, winter wheat and maize and sugar beet. You see the area squares around always, so 0.30 is 0.30 considered as relatively good. So this, but you can see for all crops clearly that the response to drought, here's drought and heat indicators are applied here. And then we get these algorithms which using different critical temperatures. For winter wheat it's 26 degrees is the critical temperature, and for heat stress, and then combined with a drought stress factor, then you get an indicator value, and finally with this indicator value you get this yield response function, or can I say also stress response functions for the different crops. Well, of course, it's not perfect correlation, yeah, but we have a high uncertainty, of course, when you get reports from yields. Yield reports, you have different cultivars included, you have different soil conditions which are deviating from your model and so on. So this is always a basic problem. Good, and one important point of the monitoring system, this drought monitoring system, is here that we can apply also a forecast, a weather forecast of the next 10 days, development of the drought the next 10 days, by including also the weather forecast of the Austrian Weather Service. In specific, we apply then the gridded data set, linker data set for these calculations. You can see here an example how it is calculated. This past the year 2015. Here are the forecast days, and here are the long-term of different years, the development of the soil water content in the of past years. Yeah, and an approach what we tried, what also is used in Czechia in the drought monitoring system, is that there's a weighted system, so it means the weight of the historical development is increasing with day in the future in the 10-day forecast. And then you see here an average value of the ensemble, a probable development of the long-term forecast. Yeah, but this is not, let's say, published in the operational system, because it cannot be understood by the users. So the data flow in the model is here shown like that. That we have the soil data, we have the digital level elevation model, land use data, crop land use data, and the weather data on a daily basis. These all are provided in NetCDF format, and then the GIS system, the whole soil water balance and the drought stuff, what I told before, is calculated, and the drought forecast maps and so will then published in a web interface. So these are the weather data on a daily basis which are provided in the gridded Inca data set, which we have in Austria as 1 kilometer grids for every day, the minimum maximum temperature, mean temperature. We have global radiation, relative air humidity, wind, even evapotranspiration, but we don't use it directly because we calculate it, and also the snow precipitation, of course, and snow. So here an overview again of the inputs. So we have digital evaluation model here. We have the field capacity based on the Austrian digital soil map and a 500-meter grid of up to 1 meter soil depths divided in 2 layers. And from that we have the available field capacity. This was calculated based on transfer functions from the soil texture. Yeah? It was a separate model. Subgroup was doing these calculations. So we have the Korean land use maps applied then for Austria, then the meteorological Inca data sets and so on. We have, of course, the Inca data sets are only available from 2003 on, but we have the data from 1981 in the system. So all input data and already calculated data are there already in the data storage. And before 2003, it was the weather data were interpolated, yeah? And after that, we have used the gridded weather data sets. Okay, this is just again data flow. There's metadata from the weather service, FTP download. Then the model will run. And with all the inputs, then with the forecast maps are produced and present in a GIS data layer and show the web interface. Yeah, this is an example how it looks. Just a few days before, this is for winter wheat, the available soil water depletion for all arable soils in Austria. It means everywhere where arable agriculture is assumed there's winter wheat grown. So it's just for winter wheat. So we see drought in Upper Austria and Lower Austria. Here there's some depletion. We have no drought in the south, it's very wet this year. And here you can see the deviation from the normal. Yeah? This looks a bit different because in Austria, in Upper Austria, normally there's a strong deviation. But normally this is a more humid region, so it shows the same deviation like in the normally dry region here in the eastern part of Austria, for example, and other regions are in the normal. And here we have the accumulated stress for winter wheats this year. So we see in these orange areas here that there is already a negative yield impact, approximately more than 10 to 30 degrees per percent of yield depletion in these regions for winter wheat. Here we had heavy drought this year in Upper Austria, for example. Here is more or less more frequent, but here it was exceptionally event this year. Well, of course, we tested, we compared this also to validated these results. So we classified these yield responses in 3 classes only, considering the high uncertainty of the underlying models and database. So, but we can here for yield depression 5 to 30%. There is the report is blue reports from the farmers, single farmers are blue, and red is a simulated one. You see there are some outliers. In many cases it's a second level, 30 to 60% yield depression. Also some outliers, of course, so and if there's a border on a class, you can see you can also make a big mistake here. For example, you're just below, but in reality you have, even here you are here. Yeah. What can be this big deviation? What can be the reason of this groundwater impact, for example? Some wet land near field near wetland, which we do not consider in our calculations. And this, of course, is a problem when you publish it in the internet. This uncertainties, you should not sell it as a, let's say, as a real site-specific reality forecast. Even when you write in text the uncertainties in the web page, you do not consider that and that and that. Nobody is reading this, almost nobody. They just look the picture and then make their conclusion, say, oh, everything is wrong, or if it's right, they say nothing. So this is was a little bit difficult to communicate with the users. So, well, the conclusions, I can skip here, I said most of this, but let's say a little bit more on the potentials. We found it's a high potential of application of spatial mapping of forecast of risks, because we can then try also to add additional risks which are not related only to drought and heat, and this way I will present in the next presentation the combi risk. It has, of course, potential for improvements when you combine in the future these maps with remote sensing indicators. Yeah? We did not do this in this project. Once the reason was because of the financial restriction of the budget and so on, but in the future, of course, there can be seen a potential to combine also remote sensing project, as is it done in Drought Danube now. Yes, for example, we can then include these products as well here. Okay, and of course, international cooperation is very important for this stuff, because to exchange experiences and models and etc., or even data to test and validate the system is very crucial. So, regarding operational implementation, this is a real quite difficult task, because first of all, you have to ensure to find somebody who can permanently pay the costs for maintaining to run the system regularly. Yeah, you have power costs, you need a server. Of course, it is fully automated, but you have to have somebody who is checking it regularly, and if there's a problem, to take care of it. It all costs money. You have personnel costs, you have technical costs, power costs, etc. And this is basically a problem. University cannot really do it, because it's depending on projects. When project is finished, you run out of money, you have to stop it. Yeah? So we tried it to run with the Agriculture Chamber, and I did it now for 2 years, testing the system on the web page, as I showed you, but also are very limited in their budgets, unfortunately. So this is a certain problem, because also the Inca data, for example, are not for free, and we have to pay regularly to the weather service quite a lot of money, 10,000 euros every year just for the weather data. So this is a certain problem. Yeah? Maybe they will be free in the future. I don't know how it will develop, but okay, this is a problem to find interested institutions who have the money and interest to use it and pay for it. Okay, and still, I would say a permanent challenge is to collect feedback from stakeholders in order to find out potential weaknesses and let's say aspects which could be improved even in the text, in the description of the text, if they can really understand what you write. This is sometimes a really big gap. Yeah? So you have to be really very simple, that the simple farmers can understand all the stuff what you think it's clear for us, yeah, but for other people it's far not clear. Good, we have a web page, you can find here the link also to the direct monitoring system and have a look on it. So thank you, that's my first presentation.